In the forgotten corner of a small-town auction yard, hope came in the most unlikely package. Sarah Mitchell, 8 months pregnant and facing eviction, spent her last savings on a rusty shipping container that no one else wanted. With calloused hands and a stubborn spirit, she saw possibility where others saw junk. Her plan was simple: transform the metal box into a home before her baby arrived. But when the heavy doors creaked open for the first time, what waited inside wasn't just empty space. Stacked boxes lined the walls, and between them a strange light pulsed from something partially buried in the corner. What secrets could this forgotten container hold that would change everything? And why did the mysterious note tucked inside the first box have her name written on it? The battered pregnancy journal sat open on Sarah's makeshift desk, a wooden cable spool she'd found abandoned behind an electrical company. Her trembling fingers traced over the ultrasound image pasted on the worn page, beneath which she'd scrawled, "It's just you and me, little one," in faded blue ink. Sarah Mitchell hadn't planned on being a single mother at 32. 6 months ago she had a fiancé, a stable job at the local library, and a rented cottage with a garden that caught the morning light. Then came the layoffs, Jake's departure, and the mounting bills that seemed to multiply overnight. "We'll figure something out," she whispered, running her palm over her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant and facing eviction, Sarah had exactly 27 days to find a solution before her baby arrived. The auction hadn't been part of any plan. She'd only gone because Miss Harrington, her elderly neighbor, insisted on driving her there. "Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as rusty opportunities," the old woman had said cryptically. When Lot N 47, a shipping container with chipped paint and considerable rust damage, up for bidding, Sarah felt an inexplicable pull. Perhaps it was desperation, or maybe something more profound. But when no one else raised their number, her hand lifted almost involuntarily. $500, she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a decisive crack. "Sold to the lady in the blue coat." Mrs. Harrington squeezed her hand. "Containers like that, they're built to withstand oceans. Imagine what it could become." That night, Sarah sketched possibilities in her journal: a tiny home with salvaged windows, a small deck, insulation made from recycled materials. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but there was something liberating about building from scratch. "We're going to transform it," she told her unborn child, "just like we're transforming ourselves." The journal entry ended with a list of supplies and their costs, carefully calculated against her dwindling savings. At the bottom of the page, she'd drawn a small container home surrounded by wildflowers, with a question mark hovering above it. The next morning, Sarah stood before her purchase for the first time as its owner. In daylight, the container looked even more weathered, its surface marred by dents and streaks of oxidation. But something about its solidity, its endurance despite obvious hardship, resonated with her. The key was heavy in her palm, industrial and unadorned. She approached the large doors at the end, noting how the metal groaned as she inserted the key into the rusted lock. "Please be empty," she whispered, though part of her doubted anyone would have bothered removing contents from something so clearly abandoned. The lock resisted, then surrendered with a reluctant click. Sarah braced herself against the weight of the door and pulled. It moved grudgingly at first, then swung open with surprising momentum, forcing her to step back. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that spilled into the container's interior, illuminating what should have been empty space. Instead, Sarah found herself staring at stacks of boxes, trunks, and oddly shaped items shrouded in faded cloth. "This wasn't part of the deal," she murmured, disappointment washing over her. Clearing the container would cost money she didn't have, money meant for insulation and basic plumbing. But as her eyes adjusted to the dimness, something caught her attention. Between two towering stacks of boxes, a faint glow pulsed rhythmically, casting an ethereal blue light against the container's metal wall. Sarah stepped inside cautiously, one hand protectively covering her belly. The pregnancy journal had fallen from her coat pocket, landing open at her feet. As she bent awkwardly to retrieve it, her gaze fell upon a small box that had been disturbed by the door's movement. The lid had fallen open, revealing a collection of what appeared to be personal effects: a tarnished locket, several envelopes tied with faded ribbon, and atop them all, a yellowed envelope addressed in elegant handwriting. Her breath caught as she read the name on the envelope: Sarah Mitchell. "That's not possible," she whispered to the empty container, to her unborn child, to whoever might be listening. "That's not possible at all." Behind her, the heavy door creaked on its hinges, as if agreeing with her assessment that nothing about this situation made any sense at all. The eviction notice was stark against Sarah's refrigerator, held by a chipped magnet shaped like a sunflower, a remnant from happier times. "Final notice," it declared in bold red letters. "Vacate premises within 14 days. Sarah crumpled the letter in her fist as she paced her tiny kitchen. The landlord had been clear: no exceptions, not even for a woman weeks away from giving birth. The building had been sold to developers who planned to convert the affordable units into luxury condominiums. 14 days, she murmured, rubbing her lower back where the pain had been building. What am I supposed to do in 14 days? Her gaze drifted to the window, beyond which she could just make out the edge of her container in the vacant lot she'd temporarily rented. In the 3 days since the auction, she'd managed to visit twice, each time leaving more unsettled than before. The mysterious envelope with her name remained unopened on her nightstand. Something about it felt too significant to rush, too weighty to approach casually. But the eviction notice changed everything. Time was no longer a luxury she could afford. Sarah grabbed her coat and car keys. The old Civic sputtered to life reluctantly, the check engine light glowing accusingly on the dashboard. Another problem for another day. At the lot, she found Mrs. Harrington waiting, a thermos in one hand and a tool belt in the other. "I figured you could use some help," the older woman said, handing Sarah the thermos. "And some tea. You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Sarah admitted. "I got an eviction notice yesterday. 2 weeks, and then I'm out." Mrs. Harrington's weathered face creased with concern. "All the more reason to get moving on this." She patted the container's rusted exterior. "Have you started clearing it out?" Sarah shook her head. "I've barely looked inside. It's packed with someone else's belongings." "Well, one person's junk is another person's treasure," Mrs. Harrington said pragmatically. "And legally, anything inside is yours now. You bought it fair and square." Together they pulled open the heavy doors. In daylight, the container's contents appeared less mysterious, though no less daunting. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that streamed through small rust holes in the ceiling. "We'll need to patch those," Mrs. Harrington observed. Sarah nodded absently, her attention drawn once again to the faint blue glow between the stacks of boxes. It seemed dimmer now, pulsing at longer intervals. "Do you see that? That light?" Mrs. Harrington squinted. "Can't say that I do, dear. Must be a reflection." Sarah frowned but didn't argue. Instead, she retrieved a nearby box and began the process, cataloguing what she'd acquired. Most contained everyday items: books, kitchenware, old clothing. Nothing valuable, but nothing damaged either. "Whoever packed these was careful," Mrs. Harrington noted, opening a box of pristinely preserved vinyl records. They expected to come back for them. The thought unsettled Sarah further. She moved deeper into the container, toward the source of the blue light. As she shifted a heavy trunk aside, her foot caught on something, a wooden crate, partially covered by a tarp. "I found something," she called to Mrs. Harrington. The crate was sealed with a simple latch. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, Sarah found architectural drawings, city permits, and detailed plans for converting shipping containers into sustainable housing. "Look at these," she breathed, spreading the papers on top of a nearby trunk. "These are exactly what we need." Mrs. Harrington examined the drawings over Sarah's shoulder. "These aren't amateur sketches. These are professional plans, with electrical and plumbing specifications. At the bottom of each page was a signature, E. Mitchell. Mitchell, Sarah repeated. That's my last name. Mrs. Harrington's expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps not such a coincidence after all. As the women continued their inventory, the sky darkened with approaching rain. Sarah worked faster, urgency driving her movements. The eviction notice meant she needed this container habitable within 2 weeks. An impossible task under normal circumstances, but as she uncovered more boxes filled with precisely what she needed, tools, sustainable building materials, even a small wood stove, she began to feel something she'd almost forgotten: hope. It's like someone new, she whispered, cradling a set of specialized tools in her hands. It's like someone new, exactly what I would need. The baby kicked forcefully as if in agreement. Outside, thunder rumbled across the darkening sky. Mrs. Harrington zipped up her jacket. We should go. Storm's coming in fast. As they secured the container doors, Sarah caught one last glimpse of the blue light. It pulsed once, twice, then steadied into a constant glow. I'll be back tomorrow, she promised softly. We're going to make this work. We have to. Sarah's fingers trembled as she finally opened the mysterious envelope addressed to her. She'd brought it home, placing it on her kitchen table beneath the single bulb that cast more shadows than light. The paper felt delicate, like it might dissolve at her touch. This doesn't make any sense, she whispered to herself. The postmark on the envelope was dated 32 years ago, the year of her birth. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting elegant but hurried, to Sarah Mitchell, who will find this when the time is right. What seems like coincidence is destiny. The container holds what you need, but its greatest gift is the truth. Follow the light. It will guide you to answers about where you come from and who you were meant to be. The first box is just the beginning. Sarah read the note 3 times, her heart racing faster with each pass. E.M. The same initials from the architectural plans. Elizabeth Mitchell, Edward Mitchell, a relative she'd never known. Sarah had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 2. Her grandmother rarely spoke about Sarah's parents, and there were few photos. By the time Sarah was old enough to ask thoughtful questions, her grandmother's memory had begun to fail, and then she too was gone, taking whatever secret she held to her grave. The mysterious first box sat on the table next to the note. Sarah had brought it home, drawn to it in a way she couldn't explain. Unlike the other containers, this one was crafted of polished wood with intricate inlays. A small brass plate on the lid read, "Beginning." Inside, nestled in velvet, she found a collection of items that made her breath catch: a silver baby rattle with her initials engraved on the handle, a hospital bracelet bearing her birth date and name, and a lock of baby hair tied with blue ribbon. Beneath these lay a leather-bound journal and several photographs. Sarah lifted out the first photo, studying it carefully. A young woman with Sarah's same wavy auburn hair stood beside a tall, bearded man. Between them they held a newborn. On the back, written in the same elegant script as the letter, Elizabeth, Thomas and baby Sarah, May 1993. These are my parents, Sarah realized, tears welling. Her grandmother had only ever shown her one faded photo. But there was something off about the image. The woman, Elizabeth, looked too young to be her mother. The sound of her doorbell startled Sarah from her contemplation. Through the peephole she saw Mrs. Harrington holding a covered dish. "Thought you might need dinner," the older woman said when Sarah opened the door. Her eyes immediately fell on the open box. "You brought one home. It has my name on it," Sarah explained, showing Mrs. Harrington the envelope and its contents. Miss Harrington settled into a chair, examining the letter carefully. "E.M., she murmured. "And you say there were architectural plans with the same initials?" Sarah nodded, unconsciously resting her hand on her belly. The baby was active tonight, perhaps sensing her agitation. "May I?" Harrington asked, gesturing to the journal from the box. Sarah handed it over, watching as the older woman carefully turned the fragile pages. Inside were sketches of container homes, notes about sustainable living, and detailed entries about a project called Legacy. Elizabeth was an architect, Mrs. Harrington read from one entry, specializing in sustainable housing solutions. Your father was an environmental engineer. They were pioneers, decades ahead of their time. Sarah stared at the photo again. But these people are too young to be my parents. If this woman was pregnant with me in 1993, she'd be in her 20s here. My mother was nearly 40 when I was born. At least that's what my grandmother told me. Mrs. Harrington's expression grew cautious. Sarah, have you ever seen your birth certificate? Of course, Sarah replied automatically, then hesitated. Actually, no. Grandmother said it was lost in a move. They sat in silence, the implications hanging between them like a physical presence. The light, Sarah said suddenly. The letter mentions following the light. I need to go back to the container. Mrs. Harrington glanced at her watch. It's nearly 9. Can't it wait until morning? But Sarah was already reaching for her coat. The eviction notice gives me less than 2 weeks now. I don't have time to wait. As she gathered the box and its contents, the baby kicked forcefully, as if in agreement. Be careful, Mrs. Harrington cautioned, and call me when you get there. I don't like the idea of you in that lot alone at night. Sarah nodded, though her mind was already elsewhere with the mysterious blue light and the promise of answers about who she truly was. The container loomed like a shadow against the night sky, its rusted surface gleaming dully under the security light Sarah had installed that afternoon. She approached cautiously, one hand protectively cradling her belly, the other gripping a flashlight whose beam bounced erratically with each step. I'm being ridiculous, she murmured to herself. It's just an old shipping container. But the letter's words echoed in her mind. Follow the light. And deep inside she knew this was no ordinary container. Something was calling her here, something connected to her past, her identity, and perhaps even her child's future. The padlock clicked open, and Sarah heaved against the heavy door. It swung more easily tonight, as if the container itself was eager for her return. Inside, darkness pressed around her flashlight beam, the stacks of boxes creating looming silhouettes. But there, between 2 tall columns of crates, the blue light pulsed steadily, stronger than before, illuminating its immediate surroundings with an ethereal glow. Sarah moved toward it, picking her way carefully through the maze of belongings. As she drew closer, she saw that the light emanated from what appeared to be a small device, partially buried beneath a canvas tarp. With trembling fingers she pulled the tarp away, revealing a metallic sphere about the size of a softball. Its surface was etched with intricate patterns that shifted and moved as she watched, like living hieroglyphics. The blue light seeped from these patterns, casting strange shadows that danced across the container walls. "What are you?" Sarah whispered, reaching out hesitantly. When her fingers made contact with the cool metal, the sphere responded immediately. The blue light intensified, and the patterns began to move more rapidly, coalescing into recognizable shapes, letters, numbers, and finally an image. A holographic projection blossomed from the sphere, filling the container with soft blue light. Sarah gasped as a 3-dimensional map appeared before her, a detailed rendering of what appeared to be the container's interior, but transformed into a beautiful living space. The hologram showed large windows cut into the metal walls, a small loft area, efficient storage solutions, and a nursery decorated with stars and moons. "It's exactly what I've been sketching," Sarah breathed, recognition and disbelief mingling in her voice. As she studied the projection, she noticed small markers pulsing throughout the design, X's marking specific locations within the container. One pulsed more insistently than the others, directly beneath where she stood. Sarah knelt awkwardly, her pregnant belly making the movement difficult. She ran her hands across the floor until her fingers caught on a slight depression. Pressing firmly, she felt a section of flooring give way, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a collection of journals, architectural tools, and a small metal box. Sarah lifted out the box first. It was surprisingly heavy, with the same shifting patterns as the sphere etched into its surface. When she opened it, light spilled out, not blue this time, but a warm golden glow that seemed to reach for her, tendrils of light curling around her fingers like a living thing. "Oh," she gasped, nearly dropping the box in surprise. Inside rested a pendant on a delicate silver chain. The pendant itself was a complex geometric shape that seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at it. At its center was a stone unlike any Sarah had seen, transparent yet filled with moving colors that reminded her of the northern lights she'd once seen in a documentary. As she lifted the necklace, the holographic blueprint flickered and changed, showing the pendant being placed within a specially designed nook in the container home, right beside the area designated as the nursery. "It's some kind of energy source," Sarah realized, remembering how Thomas, the man in the photo, possibly her father, had been an environmental engineer. Had he created this? Was this what they had been working on together? The baby kicked forcefully as if responding to the pendant's glow. Instinctively, Sarah brought the necklace closer to her belly. The light seemed to pulse in rhythm with her child's movements. "You know what this is, don't you?" she whispered to her unborn baby. The holographic blueprints shifted again, displaying a series of timestamps and notes. Sarah squinted, trying to make sense of the technical language, but one phrase stood out clearly: "Legacy activation, May 15." The baby kicked again, more insistently this time, and Sarah felt a strange sensation ripple across her abdomen, a tightening that wasn't quite pain, but demanded attention. "Not yet," she murmured, both to the pendant and to her child. "We've got more to figure out first." She carefully placed the pendant around her neck, and immediately the hologram stabilized, the blueprints becoming clearer, more detailed. A countdown appeared in one corner. Morning light filtered through Sarah's apartment windows as she spread the contents of another box across her kitchen table. She hadn't slept. After discovering the pendant and holographic blueprints, she'd brought home several more containers from the shipping container, determined to uncover the full story. The pendant hung around her neck, occasionally pulsing with gentle light. Sarah found its weight comforting, like an old friend keeping watch. Her hand frequently strayed to it as she worked, especially when the baby moved. "Let's see what else your grandparents left for us," she murmured to her unborn child, carefully lifting an old photo album from a weathered cardboard box. The album's leather cover was cracked with age, but still beautiful, with intricate designs that matched the patterns on the pen. Inside, Sarah found herself staring at a history she'd never known existed. The first photograph showed a much younger version of the couple from the previous picture, Elizabeth and Thomas Mitchell, standing before a massive research facility. The caption read, "Quantum Sustainable Living Project, Day 1 night." Sarah traced her fingers over their faces. Elizabeth had the same high cheekbones and determined set to her jaw that Sarah saw in her own mirror. Thomas had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, suggesting he laughed often. "Why didn't grandmother ever tell me about you?" Sarah whispered. She turned the page to find a series of photos documenting the construction of experimental homes, small, efficient living spaces that looked decades ahead of their time. Several featured shipping containers transformed into beautiful dwellings, complete with solar arrays and garden spaces. In one image, Elizabeth stood proudly beside a container home nearly identical to the one in the holographic blueprints, her hand resting on a slightly rounded belly. The caption, "Home Prototype, Sherton 7 and Baby Makes 3, 1993. Sarah's breath caught. The timeline matched her birth year. Further into the album, the photos grew more technical. Thomas and Elizabeth in laboratory settings, working with strange equipment. Several images showed earlier versions of the glowing sphere and pendant. Notes in the margins referenced ambient energy conversion and quantum resonance. Then abruptly, the photos changed tone. News clippings appeared, headlines declaring experimental energy project faces government shutdown, and Mitchell research deemed potential security risk. The final pages contained fewer images and more hastily scribbled notes. The last photo showed Elizabeth and Thomas standing before the very shipping container Sarah had purchased. Their expressions solemn, but determined. The caption simply read, "Insurance Policy 1993. Sarah closed the album, her mind racing. These people, her parents, had created something revolutionary, something powerful enough to frighten the authorities. And they had hidden it away in a container that somehow they knew would eventually find its way to her. The pendant pulsed warmly against her skin, as if confirming her thought. A knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Harrington stood outside, concern etched on her weathered face. "You never called last night," the older woman said, stepping inside. "I was worried." "I'm sorry," Sarah replied, gesturing to the table covered in photographs and journals. "I got caught up in all this." Mrs. Harrington picked up the album, flipping through it with careful hands. Her expression remained neutral, but Sarah noticed a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "You knew, didn't you?" Sarah asked suddenly. "You knew about the container, about my parents?" Mrs. Harrington sighed, setting the album down gently. "Not everything, but yes, I knew Elizabeth and Thomas Mitchell." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't time yet." Mrs. Harrington's eyes fell on the pendant. "I see you found." Sarah's hand instinctively covered the pendant. "What is it exactly?" "The technology in these photos, the blueprints, that strange sphere, none of it seems possible, especially not 30 years ago." "Your parents were visionaries," Mrs. Harrington said simply. "They understood energy in ways most scientists still don't. They created a power source that was completely clean, completely sustainable, and completely free. And dangerous? To certain interests? Absolutely." Mrs. Harrington's expression hardened. "Oil companies, utility corporations, government agencies with their own agendas." Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. "But why hide it all? Why not just take it with them? And where did they go?" Mrs. Harrington's face softened with sadness. "That's a longer conversation, dear. One we should have, but not now." She gestured to the window. "Right now there's a truck outside waiting to move your container to the property I've arranged." "Property? What property?" 6 acres just outside town," Mrs. Harrington said with a small smile. "Land that's been waiting for you, just like that container. It's time to build what your parents started." The pendant glowed brightly, as if in agreement. The small plot of land outside town was beautiful, rolling meadows bordered by a stream, and a stand of ancient oaks. Sarah stood at its center, watching as a crane carefully positioned her container on the concrete pad that Mrs. Harrington had somehow arranged to have poured overnight. "This is all happening so fast," Sarah said, her hand resting on her belly. "Yesterday I was being evicted, and today I own land." Mrs. Harrington handed Sarah a thick envelope. "Not just any land. Your parents bought this property 30 years ago, then placed it in a trust that would transfer to you on your 32nd birthday, which was last month," Sarah murmured, opening the envelope to find the deed bearing her name. "The timing isn't coincidental," Mrs. Harrington said. "Nothing about this is." As the container settled onto its foundation with a resonant thud, Sarah felt the pendant warm against her skin. She'd spent the previous night reading through the stack of handwritten letters she'd found in another box, correspondence between Elizabeth and Thomas, spanning years of research and love. In these letters, Sarah said, they mentioned someone called Margaret. They trusted her to be their contingency plan. She studied Mrs. Harrington's face carefully. "That's you, isn't it? Margaret Harrington." The older woman nodded, her eyes misting slightly. "I was your mother's closest friend and your father's research partner. We developed the initial theories together at MIT. But you let me believe you were just my neighbor, I've been watching over you your whole life, Sarah. Your grandmother didn't approve of your parents' work, thought it was dangerous, reckless. She made me promise to keep their research secret until you were ready. Sarah ran her fingers over the engraved patterns on the pendant. Ready for what exactly? Before Mrs. Harrington could answer, the pendant pulsed brightly. Inside the container, the blue light of the sphere flared in response, visible even through the closed doors. "It's activating," Mrs. Harrington whispered, awe and concern mingling in her voice. Earlier than expected, they approached the container together, Sarah unlocking the doors with hands that trembled slightly. Inside, the sphere hovered a few inches above the floor, its blue light casting long shadows. The holographic blueprint had expanded, now filling the entire container with glowing schematics. "It's responding to the land," Mrs. Harrington explained, stepping carefully around the projection. "This property has specific geological features, a natural electromagnetic field that amplifies the device's capabilities." "The letters mentioned something called quantum resonance," Sarah said, watching as the hologram adjusted itself, measurements and calculations scrolling rapidly through the air. "Your parents discovered that certain energy patterns exist in everything, patterns that can be harnessed, amplified, even shaped." Mrs. Harrington gestured to the pendant. "That stone is the control key, tuned specifically to your genetic frequency." Sarah's hand instinctively covered the pendant. "My genetic frequency?" Mrs. Harrington hesitated. "There's something you need to understand about your birth, Sarah." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. "Unlike the others, these were addressed to my dearest daughter. Your mother wrote these in the final months," Mrs. Harrington said softly, placing them in Sarah's hands. "When she knew she wouldn't be there to explain things herself." Sarah untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and unfolded the first letter. "My dearest Sarah," it began in Elizabeth's now familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, then Margaret has kept her promise. The container has found its way to you, and you're about to bring the next generation into our legacy." Sarah looked up sharply. "She knew I would be pregnant." Mrs. Harrington shook her head. "Keep reading. What your father and I created was more than sustainable energy. It was a new way of understanding life itself. The patterns that allow our device to harness ambient energy are the same patterns that exist in our DNA, in the stars, in the spaces between thought. We discovered that these patterns could be programmed, could carry information across time." Sarah read the next lines twice, her heart pounding. "You, my darling daughter, are part of this pattern. You weren't conceived conventionally. Your father and I used our research to imprint our genetic material with specific resonance patterns, patterns that would activate when you reached maturity and conceived a child of your own. The pendant you now wear contains the key to this activation. It's attuned to both you and your unborn child, creating a 3-generation quantum link." The baby kicked forcefully, as if responding to the words. The pendant glowed brighter, and the sphere's light pulsed in perfect synchronization. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the letter. "What does this mean?" "It means," Mrs. Harrington said gently, "that your child is the culmination of your parents' life's work, a new kind of human consciousness, one that can perceive and manipulate energy patterns directly." Sarah stared at the hovering sphere, the holographic blueprints, and the glowing pendant. "A new kind of consciousness," she repeated softly, "a legacy of life." Night had fallen by the time Sarah finished reading all of her mother's letters. She sat on an overturned crate inside the container, surrounded by the gentle blue glow of the sphere and the holographic blueprints that seemed to shift and adjust themselves continuously. Margaret, Sarah still struggled to think of her as anything but Mrs. Harrington, had gone to gather supplies, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the strange technology that was apparently her birthright. "This is a lot to process," she told her unborn child, her hand absently stroking her belly. Apparently your grandmother was a quantum physicist who created impossible technology, and your grandfather was an environmental engineer who found a way to harness energy from everywhere. She sighed, and I'm not entirely human, and neither are you. The baby responded with a series of kicks, stronger than before. The pendant pulsed in time with each movement. Sarah reached for another box she hadn't yet explored. A small wooden chest with intricate inlays that matched the patterns on the pendant. Unlike the other containers, this one had a small lock in the shape of a geometric symbol that exactly matched the pendant stone. On instinct, Sarah touched the pendant to the lock. It clicked open immediately, revealing a velvet interior that cradled a single object, an antique music box. The music box was exquisite, carved from pale wood, with mother-of-pearl inlays forming constellations across its surface. Sarah lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. When she opened the lid, a familiar melody began to play, a lullaby she remembered from her earliest childhood, though she couldn't recall who had sung it to her. As the gentle notes filled the container, the holographic blueprints responded, shifting to display a nursery design. The sphere's light softened to a warmer hue, and the pendant at Sarah's throat hummed in harmony with the music. I know this song, Sarah whispered, memories washing over her. Had her grandmother sung it, or had it been Elizabeth in the brief time they'd had together? The melody completed its cycle, then began again. This time, Sarah noticed something unusual. Beneath the music was a pattern of soft clicks and whirs, almost like a code. The holographic display responded, lines of text appearing alongside the nursery blueprint. Calibration sequence initiated. Genetic resonance pattern recognized. Mitchell, Sarah E. Secondary pattern detected. Mitchell, designation pending. Temporal alignment 90. Sarah's scientific knowledge was limited to basic biology courses from college, but she understood enough to recognize that something was scanning her and her baby. The music continued, shifting subtly into a more complex arrangement. The nursery blueprint expanded, showing details of a crib that contained what appeared to be monitoring equipment disguised as mobiles and toys. They were planning for you, Sarah realized, speaking to her unborn child. Not just me, you specifically. Somehow they knew you would exist. The music reached a crescendo, then stopped abruptly. The box snapped shut, startling Sarah. The holographic display flickered, then stabilized into a complete set of blueprints, no longer just the nursery, but an entire living space designed around the container. Sarah set the music box down and approached the hologram, studying the details. The design was beautiful, efficient, sustainable, and unlike anything she'd seen in conventional architecture. Solar panels were integrated seamlessly into the structure, and a water reclamation system ran throughout. At the heart of it all was the sphere, positioned within a specially designed chamber beneath what would be the nursery floor. "It's incredible," she breathed. The sound of a vehicle approaching drew her attention. Through the container doors, she could see headlights coming up the dirt drive. Margaret returning with supplies, she assumed. But when the vehicle stopped, it wasn't Margaret's weathered pickup truck, but a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. Two men in dark suits emerged, scanning the property with practiced efficiency. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. The letters had warned of this: government agencies that had shut down her parents' research, corporate interests that had seen their technology as a threat. Acting on instinct, Sarah closed the music box and quickly returned it to its chest. The sphere's light dimmed immediately, as if sensing danger. The holographic display flickered and disappeared. "They found us," Sarah whispered to her unborn child, her hand moving protectively over her belly. "They've been watching all along." The pendant grew warm against her skin, pulsing rapidly. As the men approached the container, Sarah noticed something strange happening. The metal walls around her were changing, the rust falling away to reveal pristine surfaces that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Camouflage mode activated. A soft voice announced from somewhere near the sphere. Security protocols engaged. Sarah stepped back, both frightened and amazed as the container transformed around her. The container's interior went completely dark for a moment, then illuminated with subtle amber lighting. Sarah pressed herself against the back wall, heart racing as she watched the men approach through a small viewing panel that had materialized in the metal surface. They moved with purpose, scanning the property methodically. One held a device that resembled a tablet, sweeping it in wide arcs. The other spoke into a communication device on his wrist. No visual confirmation of the quantum resonance signature, the first man said, frowning at his device. Readings indicated strong activity at these coordinates. 20 minutes ago. Could be interference from the geological formation, his partner replied. Or they've activated a dampening field. Check for residual patterns. Sarah held her breath. The pendant against her skin had gone cool, no longer glowing or pulsing. Even the sphere, which had been constantly active since she'd discovered it, now sat dormant, a dull metal ball resting on the container floor. The container itself, however, seemed to be working to protect her. The metal walls had transformed from rusted corrugated steel to a smooth, almost liquid-looking surface that rippled subtly, like the surface of a pond in a gentle breeze. A small compartment opened silently in the wall beside Sarah, revealing a metal box about the size of her palm. Inside was a simple key with an unusual bow, geometric shapes etched into the metal that matched the patterns on the pendant. As Sarah lifted the key, the soft voice spoke again. Security access granted. Mitchell, Sarah Elizabeth. Evasion protocol options available. On the viewing panel, a series of choices appeared. Full concealment, power conservation mode, misdirection, holographic projection. Defensive measures, not recommended during pregnancy. Contact emergency ally. Sarah's finger hovered over option 4. Who would the system contact? Margaret? But before she could select it, the sound of Margaret's truck rumbling up the drive made the decision for her. Both men turned toward the approaching vehicle. Company, one muttered. Government plates on that truck. Sarah felt a jolt of surprise. Government plates? Who exactly was Margaret Harrington? Selecting option 2, Sarah watched as the exterior of the container shimmered briefly, then appeared to transform into a half-constructed tiny house. Ordinary building materials, conventional design, nothing remarkable or suspicious. Through the viewing panel, Sarah saw the men straighten as Margaret's truck parked. The older woman who emerged looked nothing like the Mrs. Harrington Sarah knew. Gone was the casual gardening attire and friendly demeanor, replaced by a sharply tailored pantsuit and an air of unmistakable authority. Margaret approached the men directly, her posture confident. Gentlemen, I believe you're trespassing on private property. One of the men showed something that looked like a badge. Ma'am, we're with the Department of Energy's Special Projects Division. We detected unusual energy signatures at this location. Did you secure a warrant? Margaret asked coolly. The men exchanged glances. We have authorization to investigate potential national security concerns without. You have nothing, Margaret interrupted. And you know it. This property is protected under the 2010 Mitchell-Harrington Agreement. Your presence here violates at least 3 federal statutes and 1 executive order. The men stiffened. The one with the tablet consulted it again, then murmured something to his partner. We weren't aware this was a Mitchell property, the second man said carefully. Now you are. Margaret handed them an official-looking document. This is a cease and desist order, pre-signed by Judge Calloway. I suggest you familiarize yourselves with it before I report this incursion. The men studied the document, their expressions hardening. This isn't over, Dr. Harrington. The technology is still classified. The classification expired last year, Margaret replied evenly. As you well know. Now, unless you'd like to explain to the director why you violated the terms of my retirement, I suggest you leave. After a tense moment, the men retreated to their vehicle. As they drove away, Margaret maintained her authoritative posture until they disappeared down the road. Then her shoulders slumped slightly, and she quickly made her way to the container. "Sarah," she called, approaching the disguised structure. "Are you all right?" Sarah pressed the key into a newly appeared slot by the viewing panel. The container's exterior shimmered again, returning to its original appearance. The door unlocked with a soft click. Margaret hurried inside, her face etched with concern. "Did the security systems activate properly? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Sarah assured her, though her voice trembled slightly. "But it seems you have some explaining to do." "Dr. Harrington." Margaret sighed, removing what Sarah now realized was a wig, revealing shorter silver hair beneath. "I was hoping for more time before this part. Who were those men? And who are you, really?" Sarah demanded, instinctively placing her hand over her belly. "Former Department of Energy, current Department of Defense." Margaret, or whoever she was, straightened her shoulders. "And I'm the person who helped your parents hide their discovery from people who would misuse it. The same people who are now very interested in the fact that you've activated the technology." "Sit," Margaret instructed, gesturing to the crates that functioned as makeshift furniture. "You need to stay calm. Stress isn't good for the baby." "Stress?" Sarah laughed without humor. "I just discovered that my neighbor is some kind of government agent. My parents created impossible technology, and I'm apparently carrying a child with special abilities. I think I'm entitled to some stress." Margaret nodded, her expression softening. "You're right, but there's more you need to know, and I need you focused." She reached into her bag and withdrew a manila envelope. From it, she extracted a document that made Sarah's breath catch: a birth certificate. Her birth certificate. "I've kept this safe all these years," Margaret said, placing it gently in Sarah's hands. "Your grandmother didn't lose it. She never had it." Sarah studied the document, her eyes widening. "This says I was born in a facility called Quantum Research Station. My parents are listed as Elizabeth Mitchell and Margaret Harrington." She looked up sharply. "Not Thomas Mitchell." Margaret took a deep breath. Thomas was brilliant, the engineering genius behind the technology. Elizabeth was the theoretical physicist who made the impossible possible, and Earth provided the biological material that, combined with Elizabeth, created you. "You're my biological mother?" Sarah whispered. "Donor," Margaret corrected gently. "Elizabeth carried you. Elizabeth and Thomas raised you for the first 2 years of your life as you. They were your parents in every way that matters, but not genetically." Sarah's mind raced. The letters mentioned genetic resonance patterns, that my DNA was specifically designed. "You were the first," Margaret confirmed. "A child conceived through a process that combined conventional in vitro fertilization with quantum resonance imprinting. Elizabeth and I both contributed genetic material, but it was enhanced, programmed, if you will." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her belly. "And my baby, the continuation of what your parents started. The next generation carries the patterns more strongly, more naturally. Your child won't need technology to access the quantum field. It will be innate." The sphere on the floor suddenly reactivated, its blue glow intensifying. The pendant at Sarah's throat responded, warming against her skin. The holographic display reappeared, but instead of blueprints, it now showed what appeared to be a DNA helix, except it was unlike any depiction Sarah had seen in textbooks. This DNA spiral had additional structures, patterns that shifted and moved in ways that seemed impossible. "That's your child's genetic structure," Margaret explained. "The additions you see are the quantum resonance markers, the ability to perceive and interact with energy patterns at the subatomic level." Sarah stared at the display, mesmerized and terrified. "Is it safe for the baby?" "Yes," Margaret assured her. "Your parents spent years ensuring the modifications were stable and beneficial. Your pregnancy is progressing normally, isn't it?" "No complications," Sarah nodded slowly. "Perfect health at every checkup. The doctor says she's never seen such ideal readings." "She?" Margaret's eyes softened. "I found out last month," Sarah admitted. "I'm having a girl." Margaret smiled, the first genuine expression Sarah had seen since the revelation of her true identity. "Elizabeth would be pleased. She always wanted a granddaughter. The moment of warmth was interrupted by a series of rapid beeps from the sphere. The holographic display changed, showing what appeared to be a radar screen with several blinking dots approaching their location. "They're coming back," Margaret said, instantly alert. And in greater number. She moved to the container doors, securing them with the key Sarah had found. "The camouflage won't fool them twice. They'll have better scanning equipment this time." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Margaret turned to the sphere. "System, initiate protocol Firefly." The sphere pulsed acknowledgement, and the container's interior reconfigured itself. Walls shifted, creating a small living space with a narrow bed, rudimentary kitchen, and bathroom facilities. The technology, the sphere, the holographic projectors disappeared into hidden compartments. "This was always the contingency plan," Margaret explained, helping Sarah to the bed. "If they ever tracked down the technology, the container would convert to a livable space, a place where you could safely continue the pregnancy to term." "You mean hide," Sarah said, realization dawning. "Until the baby is born. Until you're both strong enough," Margaret corrected. "The agents who just left work for people who would use this technology for purposes your parents fought against. Military applications, corporate control. Your child represents something they've sought for 30 years. A living connection to the quantum field." She handed Sarah a file that had materialized from a hidden compartment. Inside was a comprehensive dossier, complete with photographs and security clearance information. "Your father wasn't just an environmental engineer," Margaret said quietly. "Before he met your mother, before he dedicated himself to sustainable energy, Thomas Mitchell designed weapons that make nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. That's why they never stopped looking for his work." Dawn broke over the property, casting long shadows across the transformed container. From the outside, it now resembled nothing more than a partially constructed tiny home, mundane building materials, conventional design. Nothing that would attract attention. Inside, Sarah pored over the architectural plans that had materialized from another hidden compartment. These weren't holographic projections, but actual blueprints, detailed technical drawings showing how the container could transform into different configurations. "It's remarkable," she murmured, tracing the intricate designs with her fingertip. "Dad really thought of everything." After the revelation about her parentage, Sarah had spent a sleepless night processing what it meant. Thomas Mitchell wasn't her biological father, but he had raised her, loved her, and created all this to protect her. Biology seemed less important in the face of such dedication. Margaret entered from the small bathroom, toweling her hair. The container's camouflage systems had created a fully functional living space overnight, compact but comfortable, with running water, electricity, and even climate control, all powered by the mysterious sphere that now hummed quietly beneath the floorboards. "The plans indicate multiple configurations," Margaret observed, looking over Sarah's shoulder. "Defense, mobility, even submersion capabilities." "Submersion?" Sarah looked up, startled. "This container can go underwater." "Your father was thorough," Margaret said with a small smile. "He wanted to ensure you had options, no matter what happened." Sarah turned back to the blueprints, noting the detailed specifications for waterproofing, oxygen recycling, and pressure compensation. Other pages showed configurations for extreme weather, desert conditions, even mountainous terrain. He built this to go anywhere, Sarah realized, to adapt to any environment. That was always the goal of their research, Margaret explained, settling into a chair opposite Sarah, to create living spaces that could exist in harmony with any environment, drawing energy from their surroundings without depleting resources. Sarah studied a particularly complex drawing that showed the container's walls constructed of multiple layers, conventional materials on the outside, but increasingly sophisticated composites within. "These materials," she said, tapping a notation, "I don't recognize them. Most don't exist in the commercial market," Margaret confirmed. "Your parents developed them specifically for this project." The outer layer appears ordinary, but the inner layers can absorb, redirect, or generate energy as needed. Sarah ran her hand along the nearest wall, feeling its subtle warmth. It's alive, in a way. Responsive, certainly. The whole structure is integrated with the sphere, what your parents called the quantum core. A gentle kick from Sarah's baby drew her attention momentarily from the plans. The pendant warmed against her skin in response. She's active this morning, Sarah observed, placing her hand on her belly. Margaret's expression softened. May I? Sarah nodded, and Margaret placed her hand gently beside Sarah's, feeling the baby's movements. Something shifted in the older woman's demeanor, a tenderness that cut through her professional exterior. Elizabeth would be amazed, Margaret said softly. 3 generations of Mitchell women, all connected to the quantum field. It's exactly what she hoped for. What happened to them? Sarah asked, the question she'd been avoiding since discovering the truth. My parents, Elizabeth and Thomas. You said they raised me for 2 years. What happened? Margaret withdrew her hand, her expression clouding. That's a difficult story, and not entirely mine to tell. She reached for another compartment, retrieving a small data drive. They left this for you. It's encrypted, keyed to your DNA and the pendant. They wanted you to hear it from them. Before Sarah could respond, the sphere beneath the floorboards pulsed urgently. A hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a small screen displaying security footage of the property perimeter. 3 black SUVs had parked at the end of the driveway, and uniformed personnel were deploying in a practiced formation. They're here, Margaret said grimly, moving quickly to another panel. Earlier than I expected. The men from yesterday. Different division, same objective. Margaret activated a series of controls. Special Projects Unit. They handle recovery of sensitive technology. The container hummed, its walls seeming to thicken as defense systems engaged. The architectural plans on the table updated themselves automatically, displaying the current configuration and available options. We have 3 choices, Margaret explained, pointing to the plan. We can stay and hide. The camouflage might hold if they don't have quantum resonance scanners. We can engage active defenses, not recommended with your pregnancy, or we can relocate. Relocate? You mean move the entire container, now? Margaret nodded. It's built on a specialized platform with limited mobility capabilities. We can reach the river about 2 miles from here. There's a contingency location your father established. Sarah stared at the security feed, watching as the agents methodically approached. Her hand went to the pendant, which pulsed with increasing urgency, matching her accelerated heartbeat. What would my parents have done? She asked softly. They would have protected you at all costs, Margaret answered, without hesitation. And now, that means protecting your daughter too. Decision made. Sarah placed her finger on the blueprint section, labeled Mobility Sequence. The plans glowed in response, and the container gave a subtle lurch as hidden mechanisms engaged beneath the floor. The container moved with surprising grace for something so substantial, gliding on nearly silent mechanisms across the property. Sarah braced herself against a wall as the structure navigated through the trees, following a path only it seemed to know. How is this possible? She whispered, watching through a small viewing panel as the agents grew smaller in the distance, still approaching the now vacant concrete pad. Micro-levitation combined with advanced gyroscopic stabilization, Margaret explained, monitoring systems on a control panel that had emerged from what previously appeared to be an ordinary kitchen counter. Your father adapted military transport technology and made it virtually silent. Outside, the container's exterior had transformed again, its surfaces now mimicking the colors and textures of the surrounding forest. It was camouflage beyond anything Sarah had imagined possible, not just visual disguise, but something that seemed to bend light around the structure itself. They'll figure it out soon enough, Margaret warned. The concrete pad will still hold residual energy signatures. We have maybe 30 minutes before they deploy aerial reconnaissance. Sarah nodded, her mind racing to process everything. The baby kicked forcefully, as if excited by the movement. The pendant responded with a warm pulse against Sarah's skin. "She likes this," Sarah observed with a small smile, her hand on her belly. "The quantum field is stronger when we're in motion," Margaret explained. "Your daughter can sense it. She's connecting." The container continued its careful journey through the woods, occasionally pausing to recalibrate its path. Sarah studied the security feed, watching as the agents discovered the empty pad. Their frustrated movements would have been almost comical under different circumstances. "What happens when we reach the river?" Sarah asked, returning her attention to the architectural plans still spread across the table. They had updated themselves to show the current configuration and trajectory. "There's a facility there disguised as an old boathouse. It's been maintained automatically for the past 30 years, waiting for this contingency." "Another safe house," Margaret nodded. "But more than that, it's where your parents conducted the final phase of their research, the phase that led to your creation." The container gave a subtle lurch as it adjusted its course. Sarah steadied herself against the table, her fingers brushing against a legal document that had slipped from beneath the blueprints. Curious, she picked it up. It was a deed similar to the one for the land they'd just left, but for a much larger property. The listed owner made her breath catch. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell and heirs." "What's this?" she asked, showing the document to Margaret. The older woman smiled. "Another part of your inheritance. 200 acres along the river, including the facility we're heading to. Your parents established a trust that converted to your name on your 32nd birthday. I've owned all this land for a month without knowing it." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "What else don't I know about?" "A significant trust fund, patents for over 40 technologies derived from the quantum research, and controlling interest in a private research foundation established in your name." Sarah stared at Margaret. "I'm rich?" "Extraordinarily so. But the money was never the point. Your parents ensured you'd have the resources to continue their work, or to hide from those who would misuse it." Margaret gestured to the deed. "The property is legally designated as a private ecological research preserve. It's protected by environmental regulations and multiple legal firewalls." The container slowed as they approached the river. Through the viewing panel, Sarah could see a weathered structure nestled among willows at the water's edge. An old boathouse that had clearly seen better days. "That's it?" Sarah asked skeptically. "Appearances are deceiving," Margaret replied with a small smile. "Something your parents excelled at." The container came to a stop beside the boathouse. For a moment nothing happened. Then the dilapidated structure's walls seemed to ripple, revealing a modernistic facility beneath the facade of decay. A concealed door slid open, large enough to admit the container. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Margaret said softly. As the container maneuvered inside, lights activated automatically, illuminating a vast underground space filled with advanced equipment. The boathouse above was merely the tip of an iceberg, a small visible portion of an extensive facility that extended deep into the riverbank and beneath the water itself. "It's incredible," Sarah breathed, as the container settled onto a docking platform. The sphere beneath the floorboards pulsed strongly, and the pendant at Sarah's throat glowed in response. All around them, systems hummed to life, responding to their presence after decades of dormancy. "Your daughter's energy signature is activating everything," Margaret observed, watching as screens and holographic displays flickered to life throughout the facility. "The systems recognize her quantum resonance pattern." Sarah placed her hand protectively over her belly. "What exactly was the final phase of their research?" "The phase that led to me?" Margaret's expression grew solemn. "The merging of human consciousness with the quantum field. Your parents discovered that certain human DNA could be modified to perceive and interact with quantum energy directly. No technology required. You were the prototype. Your daughter represents the fulfilled vision." The baby kicked again, stronger than before. Throughout the facility, lights pulsed in perfect synchronization with the movement. The sanctuary's medical bay was unlike any hospital room Sarah had ever seen. Sleek equipment lined the walls, most of it unrecognizable to her. The examination table at the center adjusted automatically to her pregnant form as she lay down, conforming to support her body perfectly. "This technology is decades ahead of anything I've seen," she murmured as Margaret prepared a scanner that resembled a handheld tablet, but was clearly much more sophisticated. "Most of it was never released to the public," Margaret confirmed. "Your parents were careful about which innovations they patented. The truly revolutionary discoveries stayed here." Sarah winced suddenly, placing her hand on her side. The baby had been increasingly active since they'd arrived at the facility, her movements sometimes bordering on uncomfortable. "She's restless today," Sarah observed. Margaret's expression grew concerned. "May I?" she asked, holding up the scanner. Sarah nodded, lifting her shirt to expose her rounded belly. The pendant at her throat pulsed rhythmically, matching what Sarah recognized as her daughter's movements. Margaret passed the scanner slowly over Sarah's abdomen, studying the three-dimensional image that appeared above the device. The holographic display showed the baby in astonishing detail, not just anatomical structures, but swirling patterns of light that surrounded the tiny form. "Is that normal?" Sarah asked, watching the dancing lights with a mixture of wonder and concern. "It's what we hoped for," Margaret replied softly. "Your daughter's neural patterns are already interacting with the quantum field." She adjusted the scanner, and the display zoomed in further. Text and measurements scrolled alongside the image, data that meant little to Sarah, but clearly concerned Margaret. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, recognizing the subtle shift in the older woman's expression. Margaret hesitated. "The quantum resonance is stronger than projected. Your daughter's development is accelerated in certain areas, particularly brain activity and cellular energy processing." "Is that dangerous?" "Not necessarily, but..." Margaret set down the scanner and retrieved a file from a nearby cabinet. Inside were medical records, extensive documentation of Sarah's own fetal development and early childhood. "These were Elizabeth's notes on your development," Margaret explained. "You also showed accelerated patterns, but not to this degree. Your daughter's resonance is significantly more pronounced." Sarah studied the reports, understanding little of the technical language, but recognizing her mother's handwriting in the margins, neat annotations and calculations, occasionally punctuated with excited exclamation points. She was proud, Sarah realized, of me, of how I was developing. "Extraordinarily so," Margaret confirmed with a warm smile. Elizabeth documented every milestone, every indication that the resonance patterning had been successful. Sarah continued flipping through the file until she reached a section labeled Concerns. Here Elizabeth's notes became more cautious, documenting what appeared to be complications. "What happened here?" Sarah asked, pointing to entries from when she would have been about 18 months old. Margaret's expression grew solemn. "That was when the first side effects appeared. You developed unusual sensitivities to light, to electromagnetic fields. You could sense things other children couldn't. It manifested as what appeared to be severe migraines and seizures." "I don't remember any of this." "The symptoms subsided eventually. Your parents developed a treatment, a way to temporarily dampen the quantum sensitivity until your brain matured enough to process the input." Sarah placed her hand protectively over her belly. "And my daughter, will she experience these complications too?" "Possibly, but we're better prepared now." Margaret retrieved another device from a nearby cabinet, a small disc shaped like a river stone, smooth and cool to the touch. "This is one of the treatments your parents developed. Creates a localized field that helps regulate quantum resonance without suppressing it entirely." Sarah accepted the stone, turning it over in her palm. It felt oddly familiar, though she was certain she'd never seen it before. "You used one as a child," Margaret explained, noting her expression. "You called it your special rock. It helped you sleep when the sensitivity was at its worst." The baby kicked forcefully, and the pendant at Sarah's throat flared in response. Throughout the medical bay, lights flickered momentarily. "Her connection to the facility's systems is growing stronger," Margaret observed, checking readings on a nearby monitor. "It's as if she's trying to communicate with the technology directly." Is that possible? Sarah asked, her scientific understanding stretched to its limits by everything she was learning. With this level of quantum resonance, yes, your parents theorized that a second-generation carrier, your child, would be able to interface with quantum systems instinctively, without technological mediation. Sarah placed the stone gently against her belly, where the baby's movements were most pronounced. Almost immediately, the frantic activity calmed to gentle nudges. "It works," she whispered. Margaret nodded, relief evident in her expression. "But it's temporary. The real challenge will come after she's born." The quantum sensitivity tends to spike dramatically during the first hours after birth. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, suddenly aware of the calendar in her mind. "Before she arrives." Margaret checked the scanner readings again. "Based on these measurements, less than 2 weeks. Your daughter's development has accelerated. She's nearly full term already." Sarah inhaled sharply. 2 weeks? But my due date was an estimate, based on conventional prenatal development, Margaret completed gently. "Your daughter isn't conventional in any sense of the word." The sanctuary's central chamber was a perfect circle, its domed ceiling embedded with what appeared to be thousands of tiny lights that shifted and moved like stars. Sarah sat cross-legged at its center, the ancient medallion resting in her palms. It had been 3 days since their arrival, and each day brought new discoveries about her parents' work and her own unusual heritage. "Focus on your breathing," Margaret instructed, seated across from her. "The medallion responds to your electromagnetic field. If you're anxious, it becomes unstable." Sarah closed her eyes, working to slow her racing thoughts. The medallion, an artifact her father had discovered at an archaeological site in Peru, before she was born, was made of an unknown metal alloy that exhibited quantum properties similar to those her parents had been developing artificially. "They based their research on this, didn't they?" Sarah asked, feeling the medallion warm slightly in her hands. "They didn't invent quantum resonance technology. They found it," Margaret nodded. "The medallion proved that humans had harnessed quantum energy before, thousands of years ago. Thomas discovered it while consulting on a clean energy project. When he realized what it was, he changed the focus of his research entirely." Sarah opened her eyes, studying the intricate patterns etched into the medallion's surface. They resembled the designs on the pendant she wore, though more primitive in execution. "The civilization that created this, what happened to them?" "We don't know for certain," Margaret admitted. "Archaeological evidence suggests they were advanced beyond their time, but disappeared abruptly. Your parents believe they may have evolved beyond physical form, that mastery of quantum energy allowed them to transcend conventional existence." The medallion pulsed with soft golden light, responding to Sarah's interest. Simultaneously, the pendant at her throat grew warm, and the baby shifted inside her. "She can sense it," Sarah observed, placing one hand on her belly. "The connection between the artifacts. They're tuned to the same frequency," Margaret explained. "The medallion, the pendant, the sphere in the container, all resonate with specific patterns in the quantum field. Your daughter is developing the ability to perceive those patterns directly without technological mediation." Sarah closed her eyes again, concentrating on the sensations, the warmth of the medallion, the gentle movements of her baby, the subtle hum that seemed to fill the chamber. As her focus deepened, the medallion began to levitate slightly above her palms, spinning slowly. "Good," Margaret encouraged softly. "You're connecting consciously now." The room's lighting responded, the star-like points above pulsing in rhythm with the medallion's rotation. Sarah felt a strange sensation, as if her consciousness were expanding beyond the confines of her body, reaching out to touch the energy patterns around her. For a brief moment, she perceived the facility as a vast network of light and information, every system connected in an intricate dance of energy. Beyond that, she sensed the river, the trees, the land itself, all humming with their own unique frequencies. "I can see it," she whispered, awestruck. "The connections between everything. That's how your daughter will perceive the world naturally," Margaret said. What requires extreme concentration for you will be her baseline awareness. The thought was both wondrous and terrifying. Sarah remembered the medical records detailing her own childhood sensitivities. The migraines, the seizures, the overwhelming input that her developing brain couldn't process. How will she handle it if I struggled and my abilities were so much more limited? That's what we're preparing for, Margaret assured her, gesturing to the chamber around them. This space was designed specifically for birth and early development in quantum-sensitive children. It can modulate environmental energies to prevent overstimulation. Sarah let the medallion settle back into her palms, its glow fading as her concentration shifted. You've been preparing for this for 30 years. Your parents planned for every contingency they could imagine. They knew their work would eventually attract attention, both wanted and unwanted. This facility was their insurance policy. A gentle chime sounded from a nearby console, drawing Margaret's attention. The perimeter sensors, she explained, moving quickly to check the security feeds. Sarah rose carefully, the medallion still clutched in her hand. Through the holographic display, she could see aerial footage of the property and the convoy of vehicles approaching along the private access road. They found us, she said, her voice steady despite the fear blooming in her chest. Sooner than we expect. Margaret studied the feeds with practiced efficiency. They're being cautious. Minimal personnel, no visible weapons. They're trying to avoid another confrontation. What do? We activate the final security protocol. Margaret pressed her palm against a scanner beside the display. Submersion sequence. The facility hummed to life around them, systems engaging with a low, harmonic tone that reminded Sarah of the medallion's resonance. Through the security feeds, she watched as sections of the riverbank began to shift subtly. The entire facility is designed to descend beneath the water, Margaret explained, as the room around them vibrated gently. It can remain submerged indefinitely, with its own power and life support systems. Sarah clutched the medallion tighter, its warmth reassuring against her palm. They won't stop looking, will they? No, Margaret admitted. But they won't find us. Not until we're ready. As the facility began its careful descent into the riverbed, Sarah felt the medallion pulse once more, a rhythm that matched both her heartbeat and her daughter's movements. For the first time since discovering the container, she felt truly safe. 1 week had passed since the facility submerged beneath the river. Through the reinforced viewing windows, Sarah could see fish swimming past, curious about the structure that had appeared in their domain. Filtered sunlight created dappled patterns across the floor of the living quarters she now shared with Margaret. How long can we stay down here? Sarah asked, her hand absently stroking her belly. The baby had been quieter today, conserving energy, Margaret had suggested. Indefinitely in theory, Margaret replied, adjusting settings on a control panel. The systems are designed to recycle everything, water, air, even waste, and the quantum core provides unlimited power. Sarah nodded, her attention drawn to a small device that sat on the table between them, a voice recorder her mother had left for her. She'd found it yesterday in a hidden compartment marked with her name, but hadn't yet summoned the courage to listen to it. You should hear what she has to say, Margaret encouraged gently. Elizabeth recorded messages throughout her pregnancy with you and beyond. She wanted to ensure you'd have her guidance when the time came. Sarah picked up the device, turning it over in her hand. It was sleek and surprisingly lightweight, clearly designed by her parents rather than commercially produced. A single button glowed softly on its surface. Were you there? Sarah asked suddenly. When they died? Margaret's expression grew distant, pained. Yes, she answered quietly. We were making final adjustments to the quantum core. There was an accident, a power surge we couldn't contain. But you survived. Elizabeth pushed me into a containment chamber at the last moment. She and Thomas, they absorbed the brunt of the energy release. Margaret's voice caught. In their final moments, they transformed. The quantum energy they'd been studying for so long became part of them. Transformed? You mean they died? Margaret shook her head. Not exactly. Their physical forms were gone, yes, but something of them remained. Patterns in the quantum field that maintained their consciousness. For a brief time, I could still communicate with them. Sarah stared at her, trying to process this information. You're saying they, what? Ascended? Became energy being? I don't have better terminology for it, Margaret admitted. It was beyond our scientific understanding, but in those final communications, they made me promise to protect you, to keep you away from the technology until you were ready. Your grandmother agreed. She wanted you to have a normal childhood, free from the burden of their discovery. Sarah looked down at the recorder in her hands, its single button pulsing gently, almost like a heartbeat. With a deep breath, she pressed. The air before them shimmered, and a holographic image appeared, a young woman with Sarah's eyes and hair, her hand resting on a pregnant belly. My darling Sarah, Elizabeth's voice filled the room, warm and clear. If you're watching this, then you're about to become a mother yourself. There's so much I wish I could tell you in person. So much I wish we could share. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was her mother, not a faded photograph or a signature on a document, but Elizabeth herself, vibrant and alive. The child you carry is extraordinary, Elizabeth continued. Like you, she exists at the intersection of human consciousness and quantum potential, but her abilities will be far greater than yours or mine. She represents the next step in human evolution, a bridge between our physical reality and the quantum realm. The hologram shifted, showing complex equations and models that Sarah couldn't begin to comprehend. We discovered something remarkable, your father and I. Consciousness isn't limited to the brain. It exists as patterns in the quantum field, patterns that can persist beyond physical form. Your daughter will be able to perceive these patterns naturally and eventually to interact with them directly. Elizabeth's expression grew more serious. There are those who will see her abilities as a threat, or worse, as a weapon to be exploited. The same people who tried to weaponize your father's early work will come for her. You must protect her until she's strong enough to protect herself. The hologram shifted again, showing Elizabeth in what Sarah recognized as the central chamber of the sanctuary. When the time comes, when she's ready to be born, bring her to the quantum chamber. The energy there will help stabilize her transition. It's where you were born, where the connection between mother and child is strengthened by the resonance patterns we've established. Elizabeth's image smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I wish I could be there with you, my daughter, but know that in a way I am. The patterns that make up who I am still exist in the quantum field, still connected to you and to your child. The hologram flickered, then steadied as Elizabeth placed both hands on her pregnant belly, carrying Sarah herself. There's one more thing you should know. The pendant you wear isn't just a key to the technology. It's a conduit. In moments of great need, when your daughter's safety is at risk, it can amplify the connection between our consciousness and yours. Call for us, and we will answer. The image began to fade, but Elizabeth's voice remained clear. We love you, Sarah. We've always been with you, even when you couldn't see us, and we will always be there for our granddaughter. As the hologram disappeared, Sarah realized she was weeping, silent tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Margaret's eyes were similarly down. They're still here, Sarah whispered, her hand moving to the pendant at her throat. In some form, they're still watching over us. The pendant warmed against her skin, pulsing with gentle light, almost like an answer. Sarah awoke to a sharp pain that took her breath away. She'd been sleeping in the quantum chamber, surrounded by the gentle hum of the facility's systems, when the first contraction hit. Margaret, she called out, her voice echoing in the circular room. The older woman appeared almost instantly, as if she'd been waiting nearby. One look at Sarah's face told her everything. It's time, Margaret said, already moving to activate the chamber's birthing protocols. Earlier than expected, but the readings show she's fully developed. Sarah nodded, grimacing as another contraction seized her. The pendant at her throat pulsed rapidly, matching her accelerated heartbeat. Throughout the chamber, the star-like lights in the ceiling responded. their patterns shifting to create a soothing, rhythmic glow. "The system is responding to your labor," Margaret explained, helping Sarah to the specialized birthing chair that had emerged from the chamber floor. "It will help regulate your quantum resonance and protect your daughter during transition." Sarah settled into the chair, which adjusted to cradle her body perfectly. "Will it hurt her?" "The sensitivity when she first experiences the world directly. The chamber will buffer the initial shock," Margaret assured her, "and we have the stabilizing stone ready for her." As if summoned by their conversation, an alert sounded from the security console. Margaret frowned, moving quickly to check the display. "What is it?" Sarah asked, between controlled breaths. "Movement on the surface. They've brought diving equipment." Margaret's expression hardened. "They must have detected the energy surge when the birthing protocols activated." Sarah closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing as her mother had instructed in the recordings she'd been studying all week. "How long before they reach us?" "Hours, maybe less." Margaret worked the controls with practiced efficiency. "But we're prepared for this. The facility's outer defenses will slow them considerably." Another contraction hit, stronger than before. Sarah gasped, instinctively reaching for the pen. As her fingers closed around it, something remarkable happened. The air in the chamber shimmered, and for a brief moment, Sarah thought she could see two figures standing beside her, their forms composed of shifting patterns of light. "Mom, Dad," she whispered. The figures didn't respond verbally, but Sarah felt a wave of comfort wash over her. The pendant grew warm in her grasp, and the pain of the contraction receded to manageable levels. Margaret turned from the console, her eyes widening. "You've made contact," she said softly. "The quantum field is responding to your heightened emotional state." "I can almost see them," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder despite her discomfort. "They're here with us." The shimmering figures remained for several moments, then gradually faded as the contraction passed. But something in the room had changed. The air felt charged, alive with potential. An urgent chime from the security system drew Margaret's attention again. "They've deployed some kind of quantum resonance scanner," she reported grimly. "They're homing in on our specific frequency." "Can they get in?" Sarah asked, bracing for another contraction. "Not easily, but they're persistent." Margaret activated a series of additional security protocols. The outer defenses are engaging now. On the security display, Sarah could see divers in advanced equipment approaching the submerged facility. As they neared the outer perimeter, the water around them began to swirl, creating powerful currents that pushed them back toward the surface. "Hydrokinetic defense system," Margaret explained with a small smile of satisfaction. "Your father's design, non-lethal, but extremely effective." The divers struggled against the manufactured currents, their progress halted for the moment. But on another section of the display, Sarah could see more boats arriving, more equipment being deployed. "They're not giving up," she observed, her hand protectively covering her belly. "No, but neither are we." Margaret finished her adjustments and returned to Sarah's side. "Now, focus on your daughter. The rest will wait." As if on cue, another contraction began. This one brought with it a new sensation, a pressure that signaled the baby's descent. "She's coming," Sarah gasped. Throughout the facility, systems responded to the imminent birth. The container that had brought them to the sanctuary detached from its docking station, its systems activating autonomously. The sphere inside it glowed brilliantly, pulsing in time with Sarah's contraction. In the central chamber, the medallion they'd been studying rose from its pedestal, spinning slowly in mid-air. The air shimmered again, the ghostly figures of Elizabeth and Thomas Mitchell appearing more distinctly now, their forms composed of intricate patterns of light. Outside, the water surrounding the facility began to glow with an ethereal blue light, visible even through the murky river. On the surface, the agents in their boats stared in confusion and growing concern as the entire river seemed to come alive with pulsing, swirling energy. Inside the quantum chamber, Sarah reached for Margaret's hand, drawing strength from the connection as another powerful contraction seized her. They're all gathering, Margaret said with quiet awe, looking around at the manifesting energy pattern. The quantum field, your parents, the technology all responding to this moment. To her, Sarah corrected, her eyes on the shimmering figures of her parents. They're coming for her. The pendant flared brightly, and a wave of energy rippled through the chamber. Throughout the facility, a cascade of letters and messages began appearing, digital communications from around the world, flooding in through systems that had been dormant for decades. Community support protocols activated, the facility's soft voice announced. Quantum network established. What's happening? Sarah asked between labored breaths. Margaret read the messages appearing on the nearest display, her expression one of amazement. They're coming. All of them. Everyone who ever worked with your parents. Everyone who believed in their vision. They've been waiting for this signal. Signal. Your daughter's birth. The quantum resonance is sending out a call, and they're answering. Push, Margaret encouraged, positioned at the end of the birthing chair. She's almost here. Sarah bore down with all her strength, the pendant at her throat blazing with light that filled the chamber. The shimmering forms of her parents had grown more distinct with each contraction, their quantum signatures strengthening as the moment of birth approached. Outside, the situation had escalated. The security feeds showed dozens of boats on the river's surface, specialized equipment being lowered into the water. The facility's defenses were holding, but Sarah could sense they wouldn't last indefinitely. One more push, Margaret urged. Just one more. Sarah gathered her remaining strength, focusing entirely on bringing her daughter into the world. As she pushed, she felt something extraordinary, a connection to the quantum field so profound that for a moment she could perceive the entire facility as a living organism, every system resonating in harmony with her labor. A cry filled the chamber, strong, vibrant, and unlike any newborn's voice Sarah had ever heard. It seemed to contain harmonics that made the very air vibrate with responsive energy. She's here, Margaret announced, tears streaming down her face as she lifted the infant. Oh, Sarah, she's perfect. The baby girl was indeed perfect. Tiny fingers and toes, a dusting of dark hair, and eyes that, when they opened briefly, showed an unusual iridescence, as if reflecting light that wasn't visibly present in the room. Margaret placed the newborn on Sarah's chest, and the contact triggered an immediate reaction. The pendant, the medallion, and the sphere in the distant container all pulsed with synchronized light. Throughout the facility, systems that had been dormant for decades activated, displays showing energy readings that exceeded all projected parameters. Hello, little one, Sarah whispered, cradling her daughter close. We've been waiting for you. As if in response, the baby girl opened her eyes fully. They were remarkable, shifting colors that seemed to contain galaxies of light. When she gazed at her mother, Sarah felt a connection beyond anything she'd experienced before, as if their consciousness touched directly through the quantum field. Nearby, the shimmering forms of Elizabeth and Thomas Mitchell grew more defined, their light patterns reaching out to envelop grandmother, mother, and child in a gentle luminescence. They're blessing her, Margaret said softly, watching the interaction with awe, connecting across the quantum field. Sarah felt it, a sensation of love and protection so profound it transcended physical reality. In that moment, she understood what her parents had discovered. Consciousness wasn't limited to the brain but existed as patterns in the quantum field itself, patterns that could persist and connect across time and space. The tender moment was interrupted by an urgent alarm from the security system. On the displays, Sarah could see specialized equipment cutting through the facility's outer defenses. They're breaking through, Margaret said grimly, moving quickly to the control systems. Sooner than expected, Sarah held her daughter closer, the protective instinct surging through her. What do we do? We have one option left, Margaret replied, activating a sequence on the main console. Your father called it Protocol Phoenix. Across the facility, systems began to reconfigure. The container that had started Sarah's journey detached completely from its moorings and began to glow with intensifying energy. What's happening? Sarah asked, watching as the container transformed, its outer shell becoming sleeker, more aerodynamic. Evolution, Margaret answered simply. The container was always more than it appeared, a vessel designed to transport you and your daughter to safety if all else failed. A soft chime indicated the completion of the transformation process. On the security feeds, Sarah could see that the government agents had breached the outer perimeter and were approaching the facility's main entrance. "It's time," Margaret said, helping Sarah to her feet, the newborn cradled carefully against her chest. "The umbilical connection has been safely secured, and the stabilizing stone is prepared for the baby." She handed Sarah a small handcrafted blanket, delicately embroidered with the same geometric patterns that appeared on the pendant and medallion. "This was made by your mother," Margaret explained as Sarah wrapped her daughter in it. "The patterns are quantum resonance stabilizers. They'll help your daughter adjust to the sensory input of the world." The baby cooed softly, her remarkable eyes taking in everything around her with an awareness that seemed impossible for a newborn. When the blanket settled around her, she calmed instantly, as if recognizing its protective function. "The container can take you to a sanctuary location," Margaret continued, guiding them toward a passage that had opened in the chamber wall. "Coordinates only your daughter can access, through her direct connection to the quantum field." "You're coming with us," Sarah insisted, clutching Margaret's arm. The older woman shook her head sadly. "Someone needs to stay behind, to ensure the facility's knowledge doesn't fall into the wrong hands." "I've been preparing for this moment for 30 years, Sarah." "But your daughter needs you," Margaret interrupted gently. "And the world needs what she represents. The next step in human consciousness, a bridge between physical reality and the quantum realm." A final alarm sounded. The facility's inner doors had been breached. Time had run out. Margaret embraced Sarah and the baby briefly, then stepped back. "Go, I'll handle things here." With tears streaming down her face, Sarah carried her daughter into the waiting container. As the doors sealed behind them, she caught one last glimpse of Margaret, standing tall and determined, surrounded by the shimmering forms of Elizabeth and Thomas Mitchell, 3 guardians preparing to make their final stand. 6 months had passed since the dramatic escape from the underwater facility. Sarah stood on the deck of her home, no longer recognizable as the rusty shipping container she'd purchased at auction. It had transformed into a beautiful, sustainable dwelling nestled in a remote mountain valley, its exterior blending harmoniously with the surrounding landscape. "Look, Ellie," she said softly to the infant cradled in her arms. The sunrise. Elizabeth Margaret Mitchell, Ellie to her mother, gazed at the horizon with her remarkable eyes, which shifted color with her moods and the energies around her. As the sun's first rays touched the valley, the baby made a delighted sound, and the pendant at Sarah's throat pulsed warmly in response. The home responded to subtle adjustments in lighting and temperature, systems anticipating needs before Sarah expressed them. It was alive in a way that conventional buildings could never be, attuned to its occupants through quantum resonance. 6 months of peace had allowed Sarah to understand what her daughter represented. Ellie was developing abilities that defied conventional explanation, sensing emotions and energies, influencing electronic systems with her presence, even manifesting small phenomena like tiny light displays that danced above her crib when she was particularly happy. The quantum resonance stone remained nearby, but Ellie rarely needed it now. She had adapted to the sensory input of the world with remarkable speed, her enhanced consciousness integrating experiences in ways that Sarah could only partly comprehend. "You're going to change everything," Sarah whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. A gentle chime from inside the house signaled an incoming communication. Sarah carried Ellie inside to the central living area, where a holographic display had outshitted. The message was from Dr. Caroline Chen, one of the many scientists who had worked with her parents and who had answered the quantum signal sent during Ellie's birth. Over the past months, they had been gradually connecting, forming a network of supporters dedicated to protecting Ellie and continuing the Mitchells' research. "Sarah," Dr. Chen's message began, her expression serious but hopeful. "We've confirmed that Margaret survived the facility incursion. She's being held at a research station in Colorado, but she's safe and being treated well. The agents who pursued you have been contained. Their superiors weren't pleased with the unauthorized operation. Sarah exhaled with relief. She'd feared the worst when they'd fled, leaving Margaret to face the intruders alone. More importantly, Dr. Chen continued, the highest levels of government have become aware of Ellie's existence. They're approaching cautiously, more curious than threatening. They've seen enough to understand that your daughter represents something beyond conventional science, something that can't be controlled through traditional means. The message concluded with coordinates for a secure meeting, and a simple question: are you ready for the world to know what your parents discovered? Sarah looked down at Ellie, who gazed back with eyes that seemed to understand everything. The baby reached up, her tiny fingers touching the pendant at her mother's throat. In response, the home systems displayed a series of energy patterns, communications from the quantum field itself. And there, within those patterns, Sarah could see the distinctive signatures she now recognized as her parents. Elizabeth and Thomas Mitchell, still present, still watching over their legacy. "What do you think, little one?" Sarah asked softly. "Is it time to share what you can do, what you represent?" Ellie made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but contained the harmonic resonance that Sarah had come to associate with her daughter's unique form of communication. Throughout the house, systems responded, displaying projections of a potential future, communities built with the quantum technology, sustainable energy flowing freely, people connecting through the quantum field in ways that transcended conventional communication. It was the vision her parents had sacrificed everything for, a world transformed not by domination or exploitation, but by harmony and connection. Sarah typed a response to Dr. Chen: "We're ready, but on our terms." Outside, the valley seemed to shimmer slightly, the quantum field responding to the decision. Sarah carried Ellie back to the deck, watching as the sun fully emerged above the mountains. "Your grandparents would be so proud," she whispered to her daughter. "You're everything they hoped for." The pendant warmed against her skin, and for a moment, Sarah thought she could see two figures standing at the edge of the forest, composed not of flesh, but of light and energy, their forms shifting like the patterns in Ellie's eyes. The baby reached toward them, making that distinctive harmonic sound again. In response, the figures seemed to bow slightly before dissolving back into the quantum field that permeated everything. Sarah felt no sadness at their departure. She understood now what her mother had meant in her final message. They were always there, patterns in the quantum field that connected all things across time and space. The rusty container that had seemed like her last desperate hope had turned out to be exactly what the auction sign had promised. Lot 47, contents unknown, may contain hidden value. Sarah smiled at the memory as she held her daughter close, facing the rising sun and the future it illuminated. "Hidden value indeed," she murmured. "A legacy of light."